Thank you for being here. I've interviewed over 850 incredible guests by this point. And when I first started this, my goal was to raise the awareness of trauma. I had been working in a clinic in Northern California, fresh out of graduate school, degree in hand, excited. And we were assessing and treating young kids who were showing early signs of psychosis. I was excited to get this job. It was an incredible experience for me, incredible community of uh, fellow therapists of all kinds. We were a multidisciplinary team, and I learned so much. And it's just very interesting to reflect back on that time. I remember going through at that time level 1 and level 2 of sensory motor psychotherapy, just soaking in everything I could about trauma. I knew that that's when I went into graduate school, that's what I wanted to focus on. I wanted to focus on being the best, quote unquote, trauma therapist I could become. I wanted to help people in dire situations. I knew in my bones that I could do that. I didn't know how to do that, but I knew that I wanted to do that. And so when I got this job, I it was very important to me to have knowledge, and it was very important for me to be able to show that I had knowledge, not in a braggadocious way, but just in a way to show that I was competent. That's it. I wanted to be competent. And because I grew up feeling I wasn't intellectually competent. And, looking back on this now, it's easy or clear to see. So, as part of this job, we had to do these phone referrals for uh, these young kids 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 were the majority of the kids. And we'd have these parents call teachers, other therapists, to see if their kid was appropriate for our program. And I really enjoyed doing these assessments because I got to ask questions, and I love asking questions and finding out what's going on. And it became essentially a puzzle, putting together, a client's behavior and history and symptoms, and were they taking any medication, were they using any drugs, when uh, did trauma start? And I say that because inevitably there was trauma involved. But it also became very, very interesting to learn how to ask about trauma, how to ask about uh, uncomfortable situations or scary situations or frightful situations or violence or fighting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that became very interesting because oftentimes events never registered with parents or teachers or other therapists for that matter. What always did register were the behaviors, the oftentimes explosive behaviors. Anyway, so I became adept uh, and I enjoyed doing these phone calls and finding out what was going on. And then at the end of this phone call, you'd have this sheet filled with all this information. And again, 99% of these kids had experienced various forms of trauma. And, a week later, whenever the kid would walk into our program, if they were appropriate, you'd see, you'd look at this sheet of everything that had been told to you and you've discovered about this kid. And oftentimes it was pretty daunting and uh, shocking. But a kid would walk in the office, just a normal looking kid, just be this young girl or boy. They'd have a book under their arm or a tablet under their arm or sometimes a stuffed animal, and it'd just be a kid. And you'd look at your sheet of all these symptoms and all this crazy behavior, and that kid in the waiting room had gone through all this. So that slowly really made me start to think about what the hell was going on. And I slowly learned how to communicate with these kids because initially I was leading with what I thought I knew. I was leading with my degree in terms of technique and interventions and modalities. And we all know that it's not the way to do it. But a lot of us don't know that. But that is, in fact, that does not work for most people. People need people. People need human beings. I want a human being when I'm going to a therapist, when I'm seeing a therapist. But anyway, I learned this the, as a result of an assessment I was leading at one point. And I'm not going to go into that right now. But my point in sharing this is that around this time, a little after this time, I decided to start my podcast because I had been seeing all these kids come in showing early signs of psychosis and not so early signs of psychosis, but more advanced signs of psychosis. But the prevalence of trauma really made me say to myself, something's got to be done. And what can I do to help get the word out? And this is what I started to do. I had been commuting hours, literally an hour and a half each way to my internship, to the work I was doing, and listening to a lot of podcasts and put two and two together and thought, wait a minute, what if I started my own podcast? Wouldn't it be awesome if I had Janina Fisher in the passenger seat, mentoring me every day about how to become a better therapist or the best therapist I could become, mentoring me about trauma? And what if I started a podcast about trauma and interviewed all these people? And so that was my goal. And the goal was to interview, quote unquote, like master trauma therapists, all the people whose names come to mind when you think about that. Janina Fisher, of course, and Bessel van der Kolk, and Pat Ogden, on and on and on and on. But things shifted for me because, I think about why this all started for me. Really, the genesis, I think, ground zero for me really was my being bullied when I was a young kid and how severely that impacted me and the trajectory of my life. And you don't really think about that. Or I should say, I didn't think about that so much. I didn't realize it when I decided to go to graduate school. I didn't realize that when I decided to focus on trauma. But when I started doing the interviews, initially I really wanted to provide an educational and an inspirational experience, but I wanted to find out from therapists how they did what they did. And that I did that for a time, but it shifted for me because I became so inspired by the stories that my guests were sharing. I became so inspired by when they started telling me that oftentimes inevitably, these very seasoned therapists had an experience where there was a rupture in the relationship with their clients that was often caused by the therapist's inability to be themselves, to be a human being, as Manuela Mishka-Ruiz says, human beingness, to express that. And I related to that so much. And I didn't really realize why, but that was speaking to me. Now, anyone else, right, in my position doing this podcast would probably have a very different experience. But this is my experience. And I'm not making a judgment and saying, this is the best way to do it. I'm just sharing my own experience. And it's about uncovering, it's about being willing for me it's like we each have our own experience. We each are colored and impacted by whatever it is. If it's anxiety, if it's depression, if it's obsessive compulsive, whatever it is, we each have our things going on to greater or lesser degrees. And for me, there's anxiety there. There's frustration. There's an existential what? I don't know what the word is. Frustration, for lack of a better word. But, and it's like if you're in a dark room, it's pitch black, you can't see anything. And yet you have both hands on the cord, the cable of your life, and you're following it down, right? You're following this cable down, feeling down, and you're feeling the the texture of anxiety or depression or not smart enoughness or whatever it is. And you have to be willing, and I'm saying this to myself, have to be willing to feel inch by inch of that cable. And then when the lights go on, have to be willing to look at that. And I think doing these interviews for me has really brought me face to face with my own stuckness, my own frustration, my own anxiety in a sense, because I see oftentimes and I look for the inspiration in my guests. I kind of pride myself in getting in there and exploring and honoring and celebrating how the hell did you get to this amazing place where you're doing this incredible work? Not so much what are you doing? Show us how you're, for example, working with these clients and what interventions are you doing? I used to do that. But now for me, it's exploring their story, exploring that journey. And in so doing that, it's uncovering the courage, the incredible courage of these people, of my guests, which in turn, right, inspires me. Hopefully, it's inspiring my listeners too, but it's inspiring me and it's giving me the courage and the inspiration to take the steps and oftentimes the slow, slogging steps of being who the hell I am in all of my fullness. And that's a work in progress. And oftentimes it's a frustrating work in progress. But it's becoming clearer and clearer to me. And I think that a lot of my own anxiety and again, stuckness and feeling as though maybe I could be doing more or maybe being more successful in certain ways. And I don't say success loosely, driving around on a Ferrari and making $1 zillion, but being more successful in my own definition. Um, through these interviews that I'm doing, I really feel that I'm learning about myself. And I share this today because hopefully it's inspiring for you to take that step and find that inspiration for you to become more of who you are, in whatever measure that might be. But I truly feel that when we're in relationship with people who are living their fullness, their wholeness, their genuineness, their authenticity, you feel it. You feel that. And I love feeling that. And I want to be that, not just for other people or people, that I'm in a relationship with, but for myself. And it's hard sometimes, but it's a journey that I'm freaking ready to take daily. Have an awesome day. Thank you for listening to this podcast, and I appreciate your support.